That right there is one of the reasons this consultation exists. SkyDemon warned me there was another aircraft nearby, and a few seconds later I'd spotted it visually. Now, could I have seen it anyway? Possibly, but did the technology help me know where to look? Absolutely. And that raises a really interesting question. If technology like this generally helps pilots see each other, should every aircraft be required to carry it? Because that's exactly what the Civil Aviation Authority is asking. If you spent any time on Facebook or the other aviation forums over the last few days, you already know that everyone has suddenly become an aviation lawyer. Some people are saying this will save lives, and others are saying it's going to destroy general aviation here in the UK. So rather than arguing about headlines, I thought we'd actually read the consultation. So I spent the last few evenings going through all 34 pages of it, so hopefully you don't have to. Unless of course you're struggling to get some sleep tonight. So today we're looking at CAP3268, consultation on a proposed electronic conspicuity mandate. In this video we're going to cover exactly what the CAA is proposing, who it affects, what equipment may be required, how much it could cost, and finally I'll give you my own thoughts as someone who flies with electronic conspicuity on almost every flight. But, and this is important, I'm going to make sure I keep the facts and my opinions separate because they may be two very different things. First, let's get one thing out of the way. Nothing has actually changed. This isn't a new law and you don't need to rush out to buy any new equipment tomorrow. What this is a consultation. So in other words, the CAA is saying, hey, here's what we're thinking, now tell us whether we've got it right. As mentioned already, the consultation is called CAP3268, consultation on a proposed electronic conspicuity mandate. It opened in June 2026 and it closes on the 22nd of September 2026. So if you're watching this before then, you still have time to respond, and I genuinely encourage you to. Whether you agree with it or you completely disagree, consultations only work if pilots actually take part. Otherwise, we're leaving other people to shape the future of UK general aviation. So, why now? Well, electric conspicuity isn't new. For the last few years, the CAA has actively encouraged pilots to adopt it. There was even a rebate scheme where many pilots received a £250 rebate towards compatible equipment. The consultation says that voluntary adoption has worked, but only up to a point. And today we've got a bit of a mixture. Some aircraft are transmitting ADS-B, some fly with CAP1391 devices, like I do, the SkyEcho. Some use pilot aware, obviously there's gliders, they predominantly use FLARM. Some aircraft have certified transponders, others have some form of compatible portable device, and plenty of aircraft still don't transmit anything electronically at all. And the CAA believes that if more aircraft were electronically visible to one another, there is potential to reduce the risk of mid-air collisions. Now, please notice the wording there. I'm deliberately saying the CAA believes. These aren't my words, but that is the purpose behind this consultation. There is one thing that really stood out to me in the document. This consultation isn't just looking at today's skies. It's looking at 10 or 20 years ahead. The CAA talks about a future where we have general aviation, commercial aircraft, emergency services, the future eVTOL aircraft, all sharing the same airspace. And whether you think that kind of future is exciting or slightly terrifying, that's probably for another video. But the point they're making is this: if all these aircraft are going to operate together, they need to be able to see each other electronically. And that's really where this proposal is coming from. Now, if you're already familiar with the SkyEcho or ADS-B, please bear with me for around 60 seconds. But if you're not, hopefully this will make things seem a little bit easier to understand. So I want you to think of things like this. Imagine you're driving your car or motorbike along at night without headlights. It's other people's job to try and spot you. However, when you turn your headlights on, suddenly everyone knows exactly where you are. And that's kind of what I think about when it comes to electronic conspicuity. It's working in a very similar way, Basically what happens is your aircraft now starts broadcasting information such as its position, altitude, speed and direction, and then other compatible aircraft nearby, they can receive that information and then display that on a moving map. However, it is important to remember that devices like this and your moving map doesn't replace looking outside. And if there's one thing I hope nobody takes away from this video, is that basically electronic conspicuity is essentially just another tool. As I think all of us would agree, there is no substitute, especially in general aviation, for keeping a good lookout. Personally, I think of it like this. Looking out the window is still your primary method for avoiding other aircraft. Electronic conspicuity simply helps point your eyes in the right direction and removes a little bit of the workload. I also want to make one thing really clear. This consultation isn't asking one simple question. It's not asking, do you like ADS-B, or should everybody go and buy a SkyEcho? It's asking dozens of detailed questions about various things. Things like the cost, the practicality, the different aircraft types, issues with installation, implementation, timescales, and whether us pilots actually think the proposal is actually proportionate. So over the next few minutes, let's go through exactly what the CAA is proposing before we start debating whether this is actually a good idea or not. Let's get into the detail, because this is where I think quite a few people have, in my opinion, misunderstood what the consultation actually says. The headline proposal is fairly straightforward. The CAA wants most civil aircraft operating below flight level 100 in the UK sovereign airspace to electronically broadcast their position using some form of common standard. Notice I said broadcast their position, because that's important. This proposal is primarily about making your aircraft visible to everyone. So you might be asking the question that I had when I first read this document. Why flight level 100? Why not 5,000 feet or controlled airspace only? Now in the document, the CAA explains that below flight level 100 is where the vast majority of general aviation operates. It's also where there's the greatest variety of aircraft mixed together. You've got training aircraft, you've got microlights, you've got helicopters, business jets, military traffic, gliders, balloons, and obviously more increasingly, probably in the future as well, drones. So rather than trying to create different rules for different bits of airspace, the proposal is basically a common rule for all aircraft below flight level 100. Simple, or at least simpler. So one of the reasons you might be watching this video is because you're asking the question, does this affect you? Well, if you fly general aviation in the UK, the answer is quite possibly. The consultation does include aircraft such as single engine aeroplanes, touring aircraft, microlights, helicopters, balloons, also foreign aircraft flying in UK sovereign airspace, and then the future beyond visual line of sight drones. However, looking through the document, there are some important exclusions. They say that aircraft already required to carry ADS-B under existing regulations wouldn't be affected by these new proposals. Also, military aircraft are also excluded, as well as visual line of sight drones. And also state aircraft are still being considered separately. So not literally every aircraft, but it is a very significant proportion of UK aviation, and that's obviously why this is important to us. Now, looking online and on some of the forums, I think this is probably the biggest misconception I've seen online. People are assuming that the CAA wants everyone to buy expensive traffic displays, and that's not what this consultation is proposing, at least in my opinion. Think of it like this. ADS-B out is your aircraft standing up and saying, "Hi everyone, I'm here," and ADS-B in is you listening for everybody else. The proposal is about ADS-B out, making yourself electronically visible. It does not propose anywhere in there about making ADS-B in mandatory. So nobody is suggesting you must fly with SkyDemon or an iPad or a traffic display. Receiving traffic remains entirely optional. Personally, I think that's quite an important distinction that lots of people online don't seem to be grasping. And this is another reason where I think Facebook and online forums have kind of got slightly ahead of themselves. The consultation does not say that everyone must buy a SkyEcho. In fact, it doesn't even mention products very much at all. Instead, it specifies the performance standard the equipment must achieve. So for slower aircraft, generally under 140 knots, the consultation says suitable CAP 1391 devices or compatible Mode S extended squitter equipment may satisfy the proposal. Obviously, faster aircraft generally require certified Mode S extended squitter equipment. The important thing here is the CAA is not approving any certain brand, it's defining the capability. So if you're wondering, will my particular gadget like the SkyEcho still comply, the consultation probably isn't going to answer that directly. Manufacturers themselves will need to demonstrate compliance with whatever the new required standard ends up being. Now, oddly, yes, and it might sound obvious, but it's worth mentioning, the proposal isn't simply about carrying the equipment. Obviously, it needs to be operating. After all, having electronic conspicuity switched off is a bit like carrying a life jacket in the boot of your car. Technically, you own one, it's just not helping anybody. Now, reading through the document, there was something I was really pleased to see. Essentially, the CAA recognises that equipment can fail. Aircraft go into maintenance, electrical systems stop working, portable devices basically refuse to cooperate, and usually on the day you've remembered absolutely everything else. The consultation does acknowledge this and says there will need to be policies covering equipment failures and basically exceptional circumstances. So it isn't proposing a world where one failed box automatically means your aircraft can never leave the ground again. Again, as with all things, nothing happens overnight. If these proposals eventually become law, the CAA is proposing around a 2-year transition period. That's to give, obviously, pilots, aircraft owners, manufacturers, installers, maintenance organisations, basically everyone involved, time to prepare. Personally, I think that seems sensible. If every pilot wanted to buy equipment tomorrow, I'm not convinced the supply chain could cope anyway. And we've all seen what happens when pilots decide they all want the same gadget at the same time. Basically half the country ends up on a waiting list. Now, here's the bit I suspect will generate most of the comments. The consultation acknowledges that there was a government rebate scheme, and many pilots like myself received a £250 kind of credit towards a compatible equipment. The scheme has now ended, and the consultation does not propose introducing another one. So if these proposals go ahead, the expectation is that aircraft owners and operators would fund the compliance themselves. Now, whether you think that's reasonable, well, we'll come back to that in a minute in the video. Another point I don't think many people seem to have picked up on is the CAA isn't saying that their proposal is perfect. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. The consultation specifically asks whether there are any alternative ways of achieving the same kind of safety outcome. So basically what they're saying is if someone has another solution or thinks the proposal should be amended, this is exactly the time to say so. And you've got to remember, that's the whole point of a consultation. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, if you've got other suggestions, other ways that safety can be improved, respond to the consultation. That's what it's there for. Okay, so if you're bored of my wittering and if you've gotten everything I've just said, here's basically the quick version. This is not law. The consultation closes on the 22nd of September 2026. Most general aviation below flight level 100 would be affected, and the proposal is about transmitting your position electronically. And if it does eventually go ahead, the CAA is suggesting around a 2-year transition period before implementation. I think those are probably the 5 biggest takeaways from the whole consultation. Okay, so that's the consultation out of the way. Everything I've discussed so far has been my attempt to basically summarize what CAP3268 actually says. So now let's separate, I guess, fact from opinion, because from this point on, This is simply my view as a private pilot here in the UK and not related to what the facts say in that CAA document. Honestly, yes, if you'd asked me 3 or 4 years ago, should electronic conspicuity become mandatory, I probably would have said no. Not because I thought it wasn't useful, I'd simply never flown with it. Back then, I think it was easy to see it as just another expensive aviation gadget. Another box to buy, another battery to charge, another subscription, and another thing to forget and leave at home. And let's be honest, already as pilots, we have quite a talent for buying gadgets. Sometimes I think we enjoy buying aviation equipment almost as much as we actually enjoy the flying. So today, however, I think, if I'm honest, my opinion has changed. Not because somebody told me it should, but because I've now spent several years flying with the SkyEcho. And no, before anyone asks, Avionics aren't sponsoring this video. I bought mine just like everybody else. And if I'm honest, I genuinely wouldn't choose to fly without it now. Not because it flies the aeroplane, not because it replaces looking outside. If anything, it's quite the opposite. I think it helps me look outside more effectively. Because in my experience, when SkyDemon tells me traffic 2 miles, same altitude, 11 o'clock, well, I'm no longer searching the entire sky looking for the aircraft. I'm searching one small piece of the sky, and I think that's a huge difference. Now, I will say, of course, that doesn't, as we've already kind of established, not everyone is using such devices, so we need to keep a general good lookout anyway. But when we know there's a specific aircraft in the sky, it's much easier for me to pinpoint it. One thing that still does catch me out though is I'm continually kind of amazed how often I spot aircraft visually, but they're not on SkyDemon. Sometimes they're aircraft without electronic conspicuity. Sometimes they're using something I can't receive. I guess that's my assumption. And sometimes there's another perfectly valid reason. But it does remind me of something very important. Electric conspicuity still isn't universal. Far from it. And that's exactly why this consultation exists. So another really interesting area is gliding. Most gliders, they use FLARM. It's a fantastic system. It works brilliantly for the gliding community. And personally, I subscribe to FLARM through SkyDemon, and that means I can often see gliders electronically. But if I didn't pay for that subscription, or I didn't have the internet connection required for the rebroadcast, many of those gliders simply wouldn't appear on my display. And the consultation talks a lot about interoperability, but getting everyone to speak the same electronic language. So I'd be really interested to see how organisations like the BGA respond, because this isn't about saying FLARM is bad, far from it. For me, it's about understanding how different communities can now all work together in the future. Now, I guess we should talk about the obvious elephant in the room, money. When I was learning to fly, the SkyEcho cost around £500. And at that time, the CAA had that £250 rebate. Now, unfortunately, student pilots, they weren't eligible, so I couldn't buy one. And by the time I passed my skill test, the price had gone up. But thankfully, the rebate still existed, so I bought one. And today, the SkyEcho costs around £650, including VAT, and the rebate has gone. So if this proposal goes ahead, that's a significant amount of money for many pilots. And that's before you start talking about certified aircraft, new transponders, installation costs, engineering time, or paperwork. And for some aircraft, the cost could be considerably higher. But here's where I think the discussion gets interesting, because we're pilots and we're quite good at justifying expensive things. We'll happily spend £1,200 on a headset, maybe up to £1,000 on an iPad, another few £100s on cameras. We pay for SkyDemon every year. Some of us even buy the latest aviation watch, and somehow we convince ourselves that flying somewhere for a bacon bap only cost about 12 quid. And by the time you've added fuel costs and landing fees, it becomes the famous £250 bacon bap. Admit it, we've all done it. So the question I ask is, if electronic conspicuity generally will reduce the risk of mid-air collision, is £650 actually reasonable? Or is it different because it isn't something you're choosing to buy, it's something you may be required to buy? Personally, I think that's where the debate for pilots really starts. Another thing that I'd like to encourage people to think about is that general aviation, at least here in the UK, it isn't one thing. Take the Sky Ranger, for example, the Sky Ranger Ninja. It's got electrical power, and installing and running a SkyEcho is relatively straightforward. But now compare that with like an older Flexwing microlight that has limited electrical power, limited space, and obviously a very different cockpit. Possibly also an aircraft worth significantly less money than a touring aeroplane. The same regulation doesn't necessarily have the same impact on every single aircraft, and I think that's an important point for the CAA to hear during this consultation. Now, if you've got this far in the video, thank you very much, but one thing I want to make sure this video doesn't become is another argument. Flying has always been full of opinions. Paper chart or SkyDemon, high wing or low wing, tail wheel or nose wheel, tea or coffee in the clubhouse. Actually, let's not start that last one because we'll probably be here all night. My point is, reasonable people can disagree, and I generally don't think that's right or wrong, and that's definitely not the right or wrong answer here in this context. So in terms of my conclusion and where I stand today, it's this. I think electronic conspicuity is generally beneficial. I think it's improved my personal situational awareness, and I think I'd struggle to go back to flying without it. But I also understand why some pilots have concerns. There's the cost, the different aircraft types, practicality, gliders, legacy equipment. Those are all kind of perfectly reasonable discussion points. But the CAA isn't asking whether electronic conspicuity works, it's asking whether the benefits of making it mandatory outweigh the costs and practical challenges. And I think those are two very different questions that are being asked. So if you're a pilot here in the UK, whatever your opinion is, I'd really encourage you to read CAP3268 for yourself, or at very least read the consultation questions at the end, because that's what the CAA is really interested in. Not whether people are angry on Facebook or on forums, but whether pilots can provide evidence and constructive feedback. As mentioned already in the video, the consultation closes on the 22nd of September 2026. So if this proposal affects you, whether you're a PPL, a microlight pilot, a glider pilot, helicopter pilot, balloon pilot, or an instructor, take the half an hour, read it, think about it, and then submit your responses. Because as I mentioned already, consultations only work if the people they're written for actually take part. Otherwise, we're probably going to lose the right to complain when somebody else makes that decision for us. Now, I'd generally love to hear what you think. Do you support the proposal? Do you think that electronic conspicuity should become mandatory? Or do you think there are better ways of improving safety in UK general aviation? Whatever your kind of views or opinions are, let's keep the comments respectful. We all share the same skies, and let's face it, we all just want to get home safely. And I think that's something every pilot can agree on. So if you found this video useful, please consider subscribing to Left Seat Culture. I normally make videos about flying adventures, flight training, aviation gear, and the culture that makes general aviation such a fantastic community. Consider liking this video if you have done, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Blue skies, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.